What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Luke Innes here. As you can see, I've gone with the Rangers jersey. I had to crack out the Rangers jersey for this one, even though it's a little bit on the hot side for hockey gear. Because this is quite a New York centric film I'm going to be reviewing today, and that is William Lustig's Maniac from 1980. Okay, so obviously I reviewed Maniac Cop a couple of days ago. In that, obviously, I said I consider Maniac to be a bit of a forgotten gem. So after having done that review, I went back and watched Maniac. I mean, broadly my opinion hasn't changed, but I definitely, having watched it again, feel like I should give it a bit. You know, I hadn't seen it in a while. So I thought, yeah, let's get the camera on, let's talk about it a little bit. So Maniac follows Frank Zito, played by Joe Spinell, who has a really murky past with his mother, who he kind of idealises somewhat, but at the same time it appears she was possibly quite abusive towards him. There's a certain Oedipal aspect to the relationship. Kind of, he gets his kicks by killing young women, basically, scalping them, nailing their scalps to mannequins that he keeps in his apartment. This film basically follows him over a short period of time. He meets a woman who he takes a bit of a liking to, you know, develops a bit of a romantic relationship with, and along the way maims a long line of people. Mostly women. As I said in my Maniac Cop review, William Lustig as a director, I think, possibly, granted I haven't seen all of his stuff, so this is a bold claim, but maybe peaked a bit early with Maniac. Like I say, I think this is a really well made film, really well put together movie. And I'll go into why in a sec, but first of all, the first thing I want to discuss is the fact that Spinell, you know, I talked about the idea of old New York in the Maniac Cop review, you know, New York before the big clean-up. Maniac is kind of the height of that era of New York, you know, the sleazy, disreputable Times Square. That's kind of what Maniac is about the idea of someone lurking in the shadows in this kind of big metropolitan area. And I think Spinell really puts the film together well to kind of show off this grungy, horrible urban environment that New York was at the time. Well, in terms of the story itself, this is, admittedly, I've got to say, given its age, it's you might be surprised to know that this is quite a disturbing movie. You know, you'd think that its age would devalue it somewhat. A well-constructed story to the point that it maintains interest. This is like Psycho. If Psycho had sort of been written a little bit more from the point of view of Norman Bates, kind of. Obviously a little bit different, but it's definitely a bit of a play on that kind of concept. As I say, the story didn't really take place from Norman Bates' point of view. You didn't know him to be a killer or anything like that. That wasn't until later on. From, you know, the word go, you know that Frank Zito is a maniacal killer. I mean, it gives you a real sense that this is going to be something very different and a bit of a journey inside someone's mind, which gives the movie a nice kind of psychological horror edge on top of the kind of pronounced sort of slasher angle that the film takes. This movie is very much Frank's story, and it's expressing what, you know, Frank's perception of the situation around it, you know, and obviously the fact that ultimately Frank's perception of the world around him is not necessarily as accurate as it might at first seem. I think this is the third film with effects by Tom Savini that I've reviewed. Obviously, Tom Savini's effects are brilliant in the movie. He's not quite at his peak yet, as I say. I think he peaked around the time of Day of the Dead, around 85. This is 80, so this is a few years earlier. But by this time, he has got ample tricks in the bag to, you know, pull off great effects. Like I say, this is, yes, the effects in this movie are really superb. They've got that great 80s kind of quality to them of being really convincing practical effects, but they're also kind of a little bit cartoonish. Like, you know, obviously the blood is quite a bright colour relative to the colour blood actually is, which gives it a nice little edge of kind of making it a little bit more intense and in your face and intimidating than it would be if the blood was a very dark, subdued colour like it actually is. I guess the thing that I could criticise Maniac for It's not a very pacey film. It's definitely, or at least it's not a hugely varied pace to Maniac. I personally am someone who, when a film is quite slow, I'm not that bothered by that. I can live with that. But I do like things to be a little bit more peppered than they are in Maniac. You know, obviously some of the kind of horror scenes and the gore scenes, they really ramp up the atmosphere and the pace, but plot wise it's always a slow burner. When it comes to advancing the story, there's no real kind of immediacy to that, and that's the thing that I guess I could criticise about Maniac and say that Maniac could have done better. I've got to say there are things about Maniac that are quite ahead of their time. You know, this is a good decade before Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. The horror in this case doesn't so much come from trying to get away from the psychopathic madman. It comes from the thought of being the psychopathic madman and why it would be awful to be Frank Zito. You know, when you couple the fact that it's really ahead of its time in a way with the fact that Maniac is an enjoyable watch in its own right, I think this is worthy of a 9 out of 10. This definitely goes on the recommendations list. If you haven't seen Maniac, I would say go out and get it if you're into horror, particularly if you're into modern horror and you want a gateway into more retro horror, kind of 80s, 70s, grindhouse exploitation type horror. A quick note though, if you're watching from the UK, the current BBFC approved version of Maniac is cut. I would imagine that if Maniac was to be re-entered, it would pass uncut. But for the time being, it is best to get an import like I have. This is a triple pack that's got House on the Edge of the Park and the New York Ripper on it. Both those films are still cut as well. And unlike Maniac, I don't think they'll be passing anytime soon. But Maniac, I think when it gets re-entered, if that should happen, will be passed uncut, I would imagine. Thanks very much for watching this review, ladies and gentlemen. As always, there will be a link to my podcast in the description. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, liking the video, sharing it. All of that's greatly appreciated. Why not comment with your thoughts on Maniac if you've seen it? Also, I've never seen the remake, so if anyone here has seen the remake, let me know what you think of it, because I hear that one gets some quite good reviews, even from people who like the original Maniac. So, you know, who knows, maybe I should give it a try if I find it. But, you know, until next time, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.